In Tokyo's largest bay, a creature of colossal proportions rises from the bottom of the sea and begins advancing on the city, destroying everything in its path and forcing all countries to unite for combat before the monster exterminates all of humanity. Today, we will recap the story of the 2016 movie Shin Godzilla. Near Tokyo Bay, the Japanese Coast Guard responds to a call about a boat that has been sitting idle for several days and goes there to investigate. When they arrive at the boat, the officers look for signs of the owner, but the only thing they can find is an envelope along with some other personal belongings. Once they confirm that there is no one there, the officers prepare to tow the boat to the marina when suddenly a strange tremor begins to occur, causing a large eruption of water right where the boat is. At the same time, a crack appears in the ceiling of the Tokyo underwater tunnel, and a large quantity of corrosive red liquid begins to fall on the cars, but is soon diluted in the water. As soon as they hear about this, government officials declare a state of alert and meet with experts to try to understand what happened. But since they don't know about the existence of the corrosive liquid, they believe that the crack in the ceiling might have been caused by an earthquake. This would also explain the volcanic eruption on the bottom of the sea. But as everything happened in a shallow region, and the only thing that came to the surface was the steam, they disregard this alternative. Still not understanding what is happening, the science minister arranges a meeting with the prime minister, and together with the intelligence team, they think of several natural explanations for this phenomenon. But young Yuguchi claims that this was caused by a colossal creature, and says that there are even videos of this monster circulating on the internet. But the ministers argue that no known creature could make the water boil just with its body temperature. With this hypothesis ruled out, the Secretary General arranges a meeting with the other ministers to decide what measures they will take to control the chaos. After a few hours of meeting, the chemical tests are ready, and the technicians confirm that no toxic gas was found in the region, and report that the volcanic activity in the area is decreasing very fast. At this point, Yuguchi insists once again that all this was caused by a large sea creature, but again, no one takes him seriously. But lucky for him, just as the ministers stop talking, the news begins live coverage, showing that the tail of a colossal creature has appeared in the middle of the ocean, which proves that Yuguchi was right all along. Now, with the confirmation of the existence of such a creature, the Prime Minister meets with the best biologists and scholars in Tokyo to try to identify what this being is and how to deal with it. But since he doesn't have enough information about the sea monster, none of the scientists will venture any kind of guess. Still not knowing what kind of creature this is, the ministers begin a vote to decide whether to exterminate, capture, or just let it go. But when the creature begins to swim toward the river that leads to the center, they decide that they must exterminate it before it causes even more damage in the city. While the military is thinking about what to do, the creature advances through the water, causing the rivers to overflow and destroying all the boats it finds along the way. Since the conversation with the biologist did not help at all, Yuguchi summons Ogashira, a former friend who is a biologist at the Environment Ministry. When Ogashira analyzes the data she has, she says that the creature is some kind of reptile and that it must have 2 legs, so it is a matter of time before this monster comes out of the water and enters the city. But instead of starting to prepare for this, the Environment Minister mocks her and says that this would be impossible. Trusting what the man said, the Prime Minister calls a press conference and says that everyone can rest assured that there is no chance of the creature setting foot on dry land. But as soon as he finishes his speech, the totally demented and armless monster comes out of the water and starts crawling around the city, crushing people and spilling more of that corrosive liquid on the streets. After passing this embarrassment on a national network, the Prime Minister calls yet another emergency council and creates a headquarters for disaster control. While the creature gets closer and closer to the center of Tokyo, knowing the catastrophe that will occur when the monster arrives in the capital, the government declares a state of national emergency and begins evacuating all civilians within a 20-kilometer radius of Tokyo, while the military prepares to try to exterminate the creature before it reaches the capital. But even before the self-defense troops begin to mobilize, the monster stops advancing and begins to evolve into something very dinosaur-like, but of colossal proportions. Now able to stand, the creature becomes even more dangerous and destructive. The air troops arrive on the scene in time and ask for permission to attack. At this point, some of the government members confirm that the area has been evacuated, and the Prime Minister authorizes the attack. But as the fighter planes prepare to fire, one of the pilots sees a father carrying his son near the creature and refuses to fire. As soon as he learns that there are still civilians in the area, the Prime Minister stops the attack and asks the pilots to wait for the next instructions. But at this moment, the creature moves again and, for some reason, returns to the middle of the sea. After the creature disappears, the Japanese government assesses the damage and begins to rebuild the city, while the military searches for the monster's whereabouts and prepares its defenses in case it appears again. Thanks to his help in identifying the creature, the Prime Minister gives Yaguchi the position of Chief of Staff and appoints him as leader of the intelligence team. With this position, he gathers the best forensic detectives in Japan, and together they compile all the information they have about the monster to try to understand what they are dealing with. But as they discuss it, the group realizes that one crucial piece of information is missing. What is the source of this creature's energy? Due to its enormous mass, scientists conclude that it needs a gigantic source of energy to be able to move and control its metabolism. With this in mind, Ogashira proposes that the creature obtains energy through nuclear fission. To prove her point, Ogashira begins to monitor the city's radioactivity index and discovers that there is a trail of radiation. Where the monster has passed. With this hypothesis confirmed, Yaguchi meets with the chief secretary and asks the Prime Minister to hold a press conference to communicate to the population and ask everyone to evacuate the region once again. But before the Japanese leader speaks to journalists, he meets with the President of the United States, who says he will help deal with the problem as soon as the agreement between the United States and Japan is made official. Kyoko, the advisor to the American president, arranges a meeting with Yaguchi to ask for a favor. According to her, several years ago, a Japanese biologist named Guru Maki predicted the appearance of the creature and was recently seen landing in a Tokyo port. Kyoko believes that Professor Maki can help by providing more information about the monster, but since he is missing, she asks Yaguchi's team to locate him. Thinking this may be his best chance, Yaguchi orders his men to try to locate him, but the only clue they can find to Professor Maki is that abandoned boat in Tokyo. That's right, he was the owner of that boat. Since the only thing they found on the boat was an envelope, along with some other belongings, the team collects all the items and takes them to Kyoko. Together with Yaguchi, she begins to read the documents that were in the envelope and discovers that Professor Maki calls this creature Godzilla, which means God incarnate. Now, knowing the name of this kaiju, the intelligence team begins to collect all the research data from Professor Maki, discovering that Godzilla was a small sea creature that was exposed to radiation because of irregular dumping of contaminated material in the ocean. By being exposed to so much radioactivity, the little animal began to mutate until its organism began to feed on nuclear energy, which gave it the ability to evolve rapidly, as could be seen in the moment when Godzilla transformed from a sea creature to a land creature, simply out of nowhere. Finally, Kyoko gives the team a sheet of paper with several codes that can help them stop Godzilla. But since they still don't know how to decipher the information on the paper, the group focuses on finding out why the creature has suddenly returned to the water. Thinking about this, one of the team members proposes that it may have been to cool the heat generated by the nuclear fission process. Since Godzilla carries out this process internally in his body, he needs to get back into the water in order to keep his temperature under control. With this being the most likely hypothesis, the team has the idea of using clotting liquids to stop its blood from circulating, causing its entire metabolism to stop working. Finally, the team names the strategy the Yaguchi Plan and tells the Prime Minister, step by step, how to authorize them to put it into practice. Before they can even begin to mobilize, Godzilla reappears in the ocean, but now much larger. With the resurgence of Godzilla, people from nearby cities begin to be evacuated to underground shelters, while the Defense Ministry discusses the best strategy to counterattack. But since they do not yet have the coagulating liquids, the Yaguchi Plan is disregarded, and the War Ministry begins to prepare the mass attacks to try to stop the creature, even with the risk of the radiation spreading. Determined to stop Godzilla at any cost, the Prime Minister sends several helicopters to the city and authorizes the attack. Wanting to minimize the damage to the city, the aircraft begin by firing with lighter weapons, but when they realize they are not causing any damage, the pilots appeal to the use of missiles. But they have no effect either. Since nothing they have tried so far has done any damage, the military moves on to phase 2 of the plan, which consists of using all the firepower of the Japanese artillery, from cannons to tanks to anti-aircraft missiles. But even with all of this at the same time, the mutant lizard continues to advance as if nothing is happening. To try to eliminate the target once and for all, the military starts phase 3, where the fighters drop bombs with gigantic destructive power right in the face of the radioactive lizard. That changes direction after the bombardment. Believing that Godzilla is retreating, the military makes one last effort to try to eliminate eliminate it and fires the missile once more. But suddenly, from the middle of the cloud of smoke, a huge piece of bridge flies through the air, hitting the artillery head-on. That's right, even with all the firepower they had, the Japanese army was not able to stop Godzilla, who continues advancing towards Tokyo. Realizing that he does not have what it takes to destroy the enemy, the Prime Minister asks for help from the United States, which sends several bombers to Japan. But since the range of American aircraft is much greater, the Japanese government needs to further expand the evacuation area. With Godzilla approximately 17 kilometers from Tokyo and getting closer and closer, government officials also need to evacuate. And as the Prime Minister prepares to climb into his helicopter, American drones finally reach the target and begin bombing it. But unlike Japanese weapons that don't even scratch Godzilla, American bombs do critical damage to the creature. However, the moment the drones stop firing, Godzilla begins to emit a strange glow as it opens its mouth and expels a large amount of flammable gas that spreads throughout the city. Suddenly, a fire starts coming out of the kaiju's mouth, which, when it comes into contact with the gas, causes a huge explosion that hits the entire city. But the King of Monsters is not finished yet. After this devastating attack, the flames in his mouth turn into a legendary laser beam. In a state of insane rage, Godzilla turns to the skies and uses the radioactive laser to shoot down the drone that hit him. Trying to fight back, 2 other American aircraft arrive behind the monster and drop the bombs on its back. But at that moment, Godzilla begins to emit the same rays through its back plates that hit the projectiles in midair. Completely enraged, Godzilla begins to fire his light beams completely out of control, breaking several buildings in half. But in the midst of all this mess, the Prime Minister's helicopter is also hit, wiping out most of Japan's ministers at once. After causing all this absurd destruction, Godzilla slowly begins to lose his strength until he ends up blacking out in the middle of the city. After this attack that devastated all of Tokyo and emitted radiation levels far greater than any other experienced by the Japanese, Japan is completely devastated and without a leader, forcing the country to take several emergency measures. After seeing what Godzilla is capable of, Yuguchi reunites with his team members who survived the attack and goes back to work, even more determined to finish off the creature. But while they are in their final preparations, Kyoko calls Yuguchi and asks him to set up a meeting with the new Prime Minister. When everyone is gathered, Kyoko tells them that China, Russia, and several other countries want the UN to take responsibility for dealing with Godzilla, but the Japanese government refuses the offer, claiming that this is only Japan's problem. But when the girl offers the help of the American intelligence team to study the creature, they decide to accept. Now, with the reinforcements, Yuguchi sends some men to collect DNA samples from Godzilla so that they can analyze them, and in doing so, they discover that the creature is not only capable of evolving rapidly, but is also able to multiply itself by parts that have separated from its body, just like a starfish. Upon learning this information, the American scientists become concerned that several Godzillas will spread to other countries and leave the room to report this new discovery to the US government. They were just there to collect information all this time. As soon as she learns this, Kyoko goes to Yuguchi to tell him that everyone is now in favor of sending a joint offensive among nations to deal with Godzilla, and that the Pentagon is already producing a thermonuclear warhead to be dropped on Tokyo. At the same time, the President of the United States calls the Japanese Prime Minister to pressure him to accept that a nuclear bomb will be dropped on Tokyo, promising that all countries will help rebuild the city after this. But even though this is an absurd idea, the Prime Minister sees no other option but to give in. After the meeting, the new secretary tells this proposal to Yuguchi, who, in order to prevent Japan from being destroyed by another nuclear bomb, gathers his team once again and starts preparing the coagulating liquids before the evacuation deadline given by the UN runs out, racing against time. The members of the intelligence team call every chemical company they know while testing the effects of the substances on the samples that have been collected. But since they have yet to decipher the information Professor Maki left, they are unable to make any further progress. With less than 10 days left to evacuate the country, the group is standing in front of the paper with the codes when one of them remembers that, on the boat, there was an origami on top of the envelope. Thinking that this might be the clue to deciphering the professor's information, they begin to assemble several different shapes with the paper until they discover that it is a molecular graph. As it was now possible to read the information left by the professor, they realized that the biologist had discovered that Godzilla's cells are able to transform, meaning that they don't need to be in motion to keep their metabolism going. With this discovery, the intelligence team comes to the conclusion that the Yuguchi plan would be a failure, and they immediately begin to devise a new strategy. After a week of intensive research, The intelligence team comes to the conclusion that the best option is to cool Godzilla's body to a point where the temperature is so low that he is unable to do nuclear fission. Now, with the Yaguchi 2.0 plan in place, they go to the new prime minister to ask for permission to put it into practice. And since he wants to prevent his country from being destroyed, the man decides to authorize it. Yaguchi then meets with the war ministry, and together they prepare a plan divided into 5 phases. When the big day arrives, Japan's entire self-defense force gathers, and as soon as they confirm that the region has been evacuated, they put the operation into action, starting with Phase 1. With Godzilla still paralyzed, the military sends some trains full of explosives to collide with the creature, causing it to awaken, and with that goal completed, it's time for Phase 2. With the creature awake, the self-defense force sends the aeronautics drones to try to bomb Godzilla again. However, once again, the king of the monster shoots the light beams from his dorsal, destroying the bombs and drones, just like the first time. Still, Yaguchi keeps sending out various drones that are destroyed one after the other, but after a few tries, Godzilla stops releasing his dorsal fin rays, giving the gap the drones needed to bombard him. After receiving the shots, the king of the monsters goes completely insane and once again fires his lasers through his mouth and tail. But eventually, he runs out again, and the flames disappear once and for all. Now, with Godzilla without power, the self-defense troops begin Phase 3, which consists of demolishing the surrounding buildings to hurt the creature. In Phase 4, the military fires cruise missiles that hit the largest buildings in the city to drop on top of the monster and bring it down. Taking advantage of that, it is on the ground. The troops start the last phase, the most important one of all. In this 5th stage, the self-defense forces take advantage of Godzilla being down to bring several trucks filled with liquid nitrogen to him. With the creature still unconscious, the volunteers place the tip of the cranes into Godzilla's mouth and begin to pour the liquid. But since it takes tons of nitrogen to complete the plan, the creature regains consciousness and destroys the entire fleet of trucks as soon as they pour 30% of the liquid. Knowing that it is now all or nothing, Yaguchi sends all the remaining trains stuffed with bombs to take him down at once. And now that the kaiju is once again unconscious, the second platoon of trucks goes to him and dumps all the remaining nitrogen. As soon as the dosage reaches 100%, Yaguchi and his men become apprehensive while waiting to make sure it worked. But suddenly, the creature starts moving again, chooses the crane tubes, and gets up to perform another attack, but ends up freezing as soon as it stands up. When they realize that the monster is paralyzed, the technicians measure Godzilla's body temperature and find that it has reached 196 degrees C, confirming that his body has been filled with nitrogen and that there is no more nuclear activity in his body. With an hour to go until the bombing, the Prime Minister communicates with the UN to call off the attack. While all over Japan, people watch in relief as the terrible Monster King comes to an end. But while everyone is celebrating, we can see that dozens of humanoid kaijus are emerging from Godzilla's tail. So, what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below, and if you liked the video, please like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.